All right, you're live.
Good morning, everyone. I am Chair Sage Turner, and I'd like to welcome you to the February 15th Housing and Community Development Committee meeting. All council members and staff are participating virtually. For those of you out there with us today, we welcome you. To help our audience follow along, I'll state each section of the agenda aloud. We are streaming live on our virtual engagement hub, and that's accessible through the hub link on the front page of the city's website. We also have an option for the public to listen live by phone. To do so, you dial 855-925-2801. It will prompt you for a code, and that code is 9791. For today's meeting, we also have the option for people to call in live and comment during the meeting. To comment live, you'll use that same number, 855-925-2801, and the same meeting code, 9791. Your phone will become muted and you'll hear the meeting live. At this point, you will hear, for more options, please press star. And if you press star 3, you will continue to listen live and you will join a queue of speakers. Each speaker will be given 3 minutes to speak. As a general reminder, if you're not actively speaking, you could keep yourself on mute to keep the background noise down. And if you have a question, you can raise your hand virtually or visually, and I'll put you in the queue. To get us started, I'm going to do a roll call. I'll introduce some staff as well. Council staff, as I say your name, please say a quick hello. Vice Mayor Shanika Smith.
Good morning.
Councilwoman Antoinette Mosley.
Good morning.
City Manager Deborah Campbell.
Good morning.
Assistant City Manager Rachel Wood.
Good morning.
Community and Economic Development Director Nikki Reed.
Morning.
Interim Community Development Manager Jonathan Jones.
Good morning.
And Economic Development Specialist Rachel Taylor.
Good morning.
Good morning. All right, everyone. So we are moving on to agenda item number 1 for those of you listening at home, and it is to approve our action minutes from the last meeting. Does anybody have any questions or amendments, changes? And if not, may I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Great. And as with all things virtual, we will do a roll call vote. Vice Mayor Smith.
Aye.
Councilwoman Mosley.
Aye.
Myself, Sage Turner. The minutes have been approved. And we will move swiftly on to item number 2 on our agenda, which is the Haywood Street Community Development Proposal. And I believe we have Jonathan, or who's introducing this? I'm sorry.
That'll be me, Nikki Reed.
Thank you, Nikki.
Great. So Jenna, if you could hold those slides up. We have a presentation that we'll share today. So I am here to present on the Land Acquisition and Housing Trust Fund request from Haywood Street Community Development. Next slide. And so we'll go over the background, their proposal, their concept, the funding, the goals for affordable housing on this site, and the action requested. Next slide. So the Haywood Street congregation has formed a 501c3 nonprofit, the Haywood Street Community Development. And their intention is to provide permanent affordable housing to the most vulnerable members of our Asheville community. And with us here today is Pastor Brian Combs with Haywood Street, as well as Ward Griffin, who's of Grace Construction. They are also represented by Austin Tyler, who's with Dewey Property Advisors. And together, this team has been working to purchase, develop, and construct the project. This will be Haywood Street's first effort towards developing permanent residential apartments here in Asheville, but they are partnering with partners that have an extensive experience in this space. And so previously, I believe it was last fall, City Council had authorized a grant in the amount of $296,000 for due diligence and associated pursuit costs for Haywood Street for this project. So meaning the architectural and other design costs, geotechnical, things like that around this site and this proposal. Next slide. So you'll see here, this is a little bit of information around the property itself. It's a 0.857 acre parcel. It's located at 357 West Haywood Street. Their proposal includes approximately 45 affordable units that will be permanently affordable. And you can see the unit mix there, 23 units at 30% AMI and below, 9 units at 60% AMI, and 13 units at 80% AMI, with also some community space on site there for residents. So this project is completely 100% affordable for a permanent affordability. And you'll note that this funding request is coming before you today. The applicant is also pursuing a conditional zoning that talks about the design and the context of the site itself. I'm joined today also by Shannon Tuck and Sasha Vertunsky. Shannon is managing that process through the conditional zoning, but I just wanted to point that out, that that's been a parallel track that Haywood Street has been pursuing while also pursuing the funding for the project. So next slide, Jenna. So you'll see here's a schematic. I know the conditional zoning will go more into the details around the property itself, the materials used, the build of the site, but that's just schematic that comes directly from their development plans is submitted. Next slide. I think it's also important to point out that if you look at a floor plan here, they're looking to do 1 bedroom with also 2 and 3 bedrooms so that they can have some opportunities for families to be on site at the project as well. And I know Haywood Street can speak more to that later on. Next slide. So here's our main point of what we want to share with the HCD committee today and really talk through the funding for the project, because as we look at affordable housing, it's really important to understand how all the numbers work, because that's truly the issue is how the math works to have affordable housing built in the Asheville area. So when we look at a total project for this, their total project budget is just over $10 million. And so that includes the land acquisition costs, as well as the estimated 7.4 for the construction costs of the project. And what they have done is they have looked at a mix of funding to really support their project budget. And so right now, the request before you today is to look at a bond allocation of $1.3 million for the land acquisition. That's listed there first. They're also wanting to secure a housing trust fund loan from the city in the amount of $904,000. So we'll go into those a little more deeply in the next 2 slides. But also I think it's important to note that they were approved for a grant from Buncombe County in the amount of $749,000 earlier this year. So that grant has been approved. And they are currently applying for funds from the Dogwood Health Trust, a $2 million grant that is currently in application. So that has not been awarded yet, but that has been part of their funding mix. And I know that application is in process with Dogwood Health Trust. So that is really their public sources of funding and their philanthropic sources of funding. They also have secured a loan commitment of just over $4 million from an area lender to contribute toward the site. And Haywood Street is also contributing just over $800,000 in equity to the project, as well as a deferred developer fee. Next slide. So let's talk terms. So let's get into the terms of the city's funding in this project. So you'll see on the slide the proposed terms for the Housing Trust Fund. So what's really important to remember about the city's Housing Trust Fund, and I didn't realize this, but it's been in existence now for over 20 years, which I think is quite amazing, just considering the city's commitment to affordable housing. So having this as a 20-year asset is quite amazing, I think. So when we look at the Housing Trust Fund, our priority here is to have that be a revolving loan fund. I think we want to see that fund continue to be a resource for our community over time. And so really what's important and what our negotiations were with the applicant is to look at what a payback of that loan. When you're attempting to do deep affordability, as Haywood Street is doing here, you often have to secure grants where you can. That's what you see from their requests with the land and with Buncombe County and with Dogwood Health Trust, but also having deferred interest or lower interest rates on any type of loan is important to make the pro forma, to make the numbers work. So what you see here, how they have proposed these terms is that for the first 10 years of the project existence, they really want to stabilize the project, stabilize the rents, ensure operations are in order. And so having a no interest and no payments for the first 10 years was important to the applicant. Then thereafter, they're offering to pay the 1% interest for the next 10 years. And then at point 20, that will present an opportunity for Haywood Street to either convert the loan to a 30-year amortization at 1% or pay back the loan at that time. So if you think about it, what I've heard from Haywood Street is that they would be seeking to potentially refinance the development at year 20. And that gives them some options to consider, either repaying the city in full for the principal of the Housing Trust Fund loan of the $904,000 in total, or re-amortizing that as a package with their other financing on a 30-year amortization. So what this means is that the total relationship for the loan here with the city and the Haywood Street is based on a potential of 50 years. And that's important to keep in mind because that is currently above the policy that we have for Housing Trust Fund. But in this case, we look at the permanent affordability and the deep affordability to provide justification for this. But I think, again, our key is that we're going to see that this loan is repaid and that this will be secured by a deed of trust, a legal instrument that will accompany the property, that will basically ride with the property until that principal is paid. Yes, Sage.
Just a quick process question. So when we see an applicant bring forth something that is outside the policy, how do we respond? Do we update the policy, or we can approve something that's outside the policy?
That is council's determination. So that is up to the committee to provide the endorsement for these terms today. That's actually the action that we're going to be requesting. And so it is council's authority to make exceptions to the policy.
We do have that authority. Okay.
Absolutely. And with that, we'll move on. Next slide. So in terms of the land, they're also seeking a grant of $1.3 million for the purchase of the acreage at West Haywood Street. And so when we look at this type of arrangement, the land itself will be the security interest for the city's investment here. So this will be accompanied by a deed restriction. So it will carry with the land in perpetuity for permanent affordable housing at the site. And what we will write into the contract is that should a project not come to fruition within a stated amount of time, that Haywood Street then must sell the site and repay the city the grant amount. So that will be included in the contract with Haywood Street and be included as a reference on the deed and will carry with the property. So really the deed restriction is the mechanism that we have to ensure the long-term permanent affordability at this site, and it creates the site's affordability in perpetuity. Yes, go ahead.
Would that deed restriction include something giving the city right of first purchase?
We've talked about that. We've considered that. And I think in this case, what we understood is that having actually the funds repaid was the priority here. And so we have had opportunities where the property itself reverts to the city. But I think in this case, we've taken a look at the different projects that the city has with city-owned land and the affordable housing development on city-owned land, considered that. And in this case, I think what we're proposing is that the funding actually come back to the city rather than the land itself. Okay, so next slide, please. So again, I think when we look at the level of partnership that the city is contemplating here, we really want to be intentional about what we hope to accomplish in partnership with Haywood Street. So first, it's this strategic opportunity to invest in a partner who's offering deep affordability, and also this community of care and connection with Haywood Street's core services, and we'll hear more about that from the applicant. This project is really ideally located near many downtown employment opportunities, good access to transit and essential services. I mean, really right in our city core. And so I think we all recognize the expense associated with building in our core, but also the unique opportunity that it provides to individuals living there to not have to have a car, to be close to employment opportunities, and to be close to services that would be necessary. So really having this ideal location, thinking too about that neighborhood, the overall neighborhood, and thinking about what we're wanting to see with a truly mixed income neighborhoods that are the most sustainable for our community. And looking at that, I think, is another key point about the location of the property. Also, we're seeing that this leverages partnership from both Buncombe County and Dogwood Health Trust pending their approval. So having that partnership where we're seeing not only the city, but other institutions contribute to this project, I think really helps to provide evidence for what we're hoping to achieve. And then really that long-term permanent affordability helps ensure that long-term supply of affordable housing at this location. Next slide.
Nikki, if I may, I just want to highlight what we're saying here. This is a partnership between the county, the city, and Dogwood. And, this is just a tremendous thing to point out that all three entities are coming together on this project. It's a new trend, and I'm thankful for the partners.
So we are asking the committee to take action today. We're asking for a motion to support this request by Haywood Street for the $1.3 million in funding to purchase the land, the 904 of the Housing Trust Fund for construction for the 45 permanently affordable rental homes. So we are asking for that action today. And as per our process, we do have Brian Combs and Ward Griffin who are joining us today. And I think we wanted to give time for the applicant to share and answer any questions. So I'll turn it over to Brian Combs. And Brian, if you are on mute.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you, Councilwomen, for the invitation to be here. We're so glad to finally be arriving at this moment. Rather than offering a lengthy presentation, I'll just underscore 5 points and then defer to whatever questions you all might have. Despite numerous attempts to clarify, there are a number of groups in town that are still uncertain about our proposal. Just to be clear, we are not suggesting permanent supportive housing, nor providing direct services, nor a high access shelter. Instead, as Nikki pointed out, we're proposing 45 deeply affordable apartments on the edge of downtown, 100% affordable in perpetuity, and we're asking that the land be deed restricted accordingly. Of all the statistics in the Bowen report, the one that's most glaring to us is the need for 24,000 units regionally, and that half of those need to be at 30% area median income. And following the data, 23 of our units will accept vouchers for residents earning up to $15,000 a year. Wanting to be a good neighbor, we have attempted to be exhaustive in our attempts at outreach in the Weekend neighborhood. We've collected nearly 200 contacts via phone, email, text, and in-person gatherings. We've held 4 voluntary on-site public conversations in addition to the required TRC meeting. We've created a transparency tracker online with every date, drawing, and upcoming decision. And we've tried to honor the history of the neighborhood through incorporating a number of mill cottage design elements into architecture, and we're leaning towards naming the building after a local heroine of color. While Haywood Street intends annually to pursue the next deal, this is our first project, and knowing that, we've tried to grow our capacity in a number of ways. Givens Estates has nearly 40 years of experience with senior communities, 2 of which are affordable. They have nearly 1,500 residents across Asheville and Waynesville, and we're finalizing a contract with them to handle our property management. Ward Griffin, who's with us today, is our contractor and consultant. He has 20 years of experience and 500 transactions, including with voucher holders and building multifamily. And he's had a chance to work on every side of the table: brokerage, sales, lending, construction, and development. And then on the church side of things, Haywood Street has slept in shelters, visited camps, moved into help folks into Aston Towers. We've blessed the keys to single wide trailers. And every day, all day, we share life with congregants in respite who are trying to heal and waiting for the name to be called on the housing wait list. Finally, equity is just not an important consideration to us. It's an essential one, considering the white supremacy entrenched in our nation's housing policy. We must consider displaced and disenfranchised folks first. And to do so, we will have an aggressive, affirmative, fair housing marketing plan. And this is a strategy of outreach to applicants who are least likely to apply. And we'll implement this in at least 3 ways. We'll advertise heavily with groups like YMI, YWCA, OLA Carolina, WinCap. leverage our many relationships within the Black churches, and we will literally hand out applications to folks who are considered special needs. So on behalf of Haywood Street Community Development and the many vulnerable citizens who have informed our proposal, we're so grateful again to be here today. And I especially want to say thank you for the city's incredible leadership over the past year to help us arrive at this very moment. So again, we're very interested in your questions. And again, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Pastor Combs, for being here and for your application. I see Antoinette has a question. Go ahead.
Actually, Antoinette does not have a question. Antoinette wants to thank you for your thoughtful approach to equity. I appreciate it. I appreciate you and the work that you do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Vice Mayor, any questions or concerns from you?
No, just like Councilwoman Mosley, just want to offer a little thankfulness to Pastor Combs for sticking to it. This has been a long and rough road, and I can imagine you could have found a lot of exit ramps, but you stuck to it, formed a lot of great relationships in the midst of conflict. So what you have landed on today, I'm in total approval of. And I do have one question about funding partners. It seems like, when we were in this partnership with other major funders, whether governmental or philanthropic, there's kind of like this domino effect. One is waiting on the other to fall into a project. So I just have a question about Dogwood's commitment. Is their commitment contingent on this approval today and the greater approval and that will come before full council?
Thank you for that question. Their commitment is contingent on a number of things, like doing an appraisal, making sure property management contract has been signed, the capital stack is finalized. So they are watching what you all are doing very closely, and their letter reflects that. I'm happy to send the letter that they literally have written in the past few weeks, confirming their commitment to this project, if that's helpful.
That'll be helpful. And thank you again to all the funders who, no matter when you fall in, we need all hands on deck. And I love this project, have loved it from the very beginning. And I'm glad we have a nice landing spot.
Thank you. Ms. Mosley?
Actually, I do have a question, but I think this is for Nikki. What's the balance in the Housing Trust Fund?
3.2.
Thank you.
Right now, I'm working on growing my capacity to understand the Housing Trust Fund because it is a revolving loan fund. So every year we have that $500,000 influx from the general fund. We also have payoff that occurs on a regular basis. So we're trying to assess how all those variables factor into the Housing Trust Fund. But I think at the end of the day, what we're looking at right now is a capacity of 2.3. And so 2.3 million. So that is what we're calling our rough balance right now, which will flux. And I want to provide an update on a more regular basis so we're able to keep track on that. But right now, without accounting for the future allocations that may happen in the next couple of months, our balance is at 2.3.
Okay, thanks.
Good question. Any other questions for Pastor
Nikki,
Combs?
did you say that the Housing Trust Fund is 20 years old?
That's what I understand. I've been trying to really dig deep on looking at some of our guiding documents that have been developed over the years, and I think what I saw was that it was a 20-year program. So I really want to dig into that and provide more context for that to this committee at a later date because that's been what I understand.
I can share a little bit about that. So the policy is that old, roughly. However, it didn't work for a long time and it's not used. And I've spent 5 years on the Affordable Housing Committee, and each year we did a few tweaks to it. And as you know, recently, or just last summer, we added a whole new, I'm sorry, I don't want to digress. So the first project that ever used this kind of loan, I think, was 10 years ago. So it wasn't used for a long time. It's been tweaked to be better. I think the research on that, the timeline on that would be helpful. As with Luigi, both of these programs we could do a little review on in the future. I do want to say a couple things. I'm sorry, I didn't cut you off, did I, Shanika?
No, I just didn't want to miss an opportunity to have cake and celebrate.
Oh, that's great. So a couple things stick out about this project for me. The permanent affordability. This is a really rare, this is like the unicorn of affordable housing projects, the permanence. A lot of times what we do is see 20 years of affordability, or even in the Luigi arena, we'll see like 16 years. But I think the Aston 360 Hillary next to the Aston is the first one we had at 50 years. So this permanent is quite impressive, and I appreciate the applicant figuring out a way to do that because it seems to be impossible for others. I also want to point out a great appreciation I have for accepting vouchers, and a little background on that. So residents in our community that have a housing voucher in hand, they're required to spend 1 year in a public housing neighborhood before that voucher is considered, I don't know the term, like out on the street where you can go into other rental arenas and rent a home. And we constantly hear that we don't have enough locations or units accepting vouchers, and it's very true. The point I want to make is that when we see even one unit accept a voucher, we're really helping two families because you're freeing up a unit behind them where they were that already accepts vouchers. And it's helping twice as many people. And I don't want that point to be lost. And I really, really appreciate the applicant just including this much voucher acceptance in the project willingly. I'm very supportive of this. I know that this project has been working and these applicants have been working together for a long time. And to Vice Mayor Shanika's point about the leveraging and the partnerships and when they fall in, it has been challenging for the community and these various partners to figure out how to do this together and in what order. And I'm just really thankful that it's coming together, that we're here at this point and we have a process. And I just really am supportive, and I'm happy to make a motion if we're ready. Any other questions or concerns? And I would like to motion to support a request by Haywood Street Community Development for $1.3 million in funding to purchase land and $904,000 housing trust fund to construct 45 permanently affordable rental homes on property located at 343 and 357 West Haywood Street in the city of Asheville, and move this request to council.
Second.
Great. I do want to make one more point I want to mention that I just forgot. The average unit in our own studies that we've done at the city of Asheville and in the history of portable housing development, we have found that we need to spend $80,000 to $100,000 per unit to create an affordable unit at 80% AMI. So with this city's investment, the total for just ours is $48,000 per unit. And that's well below what we accept and well below what we expect to create one unit. And I just wanted to share that because it's an incredible achievement. And with that, I'll do a roll call vote. Vice Maker Smith? Vice Maker.
Vice Maker. I hope I'm not a Vice Maker. Aye.
Councilwoman Mosley.
Aye.
And myself, Sage Turner, aye. Thank you, Pastor Combs and team, for being here today, and we'll see you at the next step. Okay, for those of you listening at home, we are moving on to the next item in our agenda. Just a second. All right, so that item will be number 3, Strategic Partnership Fund. I guess I'm not speaking very well today. And we'll have Rachel Taylor with us to introduce that item.
And so I'll kick us off, and then we'll turn it over to Rachel to go through the presentation. So yes, we are here to update about the strategic partnership funds. Jen, if you'll share the next slide. So really what we wanted to share today is some key takeaways for the committee to consider. And so I think what's important to start with is our context. So thinking about the SBF grant and then thinking about where we are with our federal grant cycles. One of my tasks as director is to really try to understand how our processes for our different grant cycles coalesce and really what our goals are relative to managing staff capacity and managing our resources to create a sustainable funding cycle for SPF. So really one of my first thoughts with this funding program is to acknowledge some of the existing work that we manage. As you all know, we're kind of in the midst of our CDBG and home cycles right now. Applications were due February 4th, and a little bit later, we'll have Jonathan talk to you about what's upcoming for those funding cycles, as well as kind of a brand new thing was the ARPA funding process that's currently underway. And that's been something that's happened within the past couple of years since SBF has been on hold, that presented new funding in our community. And then also, so everyone understands, the home ARP funds, that process is beginning to ramp up. So the home ARP was a separate allocation of $4.7 million to specifically address the issues around people experiencing homelessness in our community, with funding being designated for our 4-county partnership through the Home Consortium to manage those funds. So our staff team is going to be on point for doing the home ARP process as well. And we talked more about that at our most recent Home Consortium meeting. So for me, just trying to balance and understand all these different funding cycles that we are engaged with, how that impacts the capacity of our nonprofits as well. It was really important, like I said, for the sustainability of this funding to get that cycle right. And so what we're hoping to accomplish is to look at allocations within this fall cycle. So really develop our process such that by the fall of this year, we are seeing these projects go into contract and really see that money being distributed within the community, and really trying to match that also with nonprofit fiscal calendars as well. So that's really our first point, is to really be cognizant of how a lot of funding is out in the community right now, and how these funds also are going to play a role in that, and to ensure that we have the proper staff resources and capacity to manage that. But the second point I want to underscore is that, given that there's been some time lapse with these funds, we want to ensure commitment and fidelity to this process, that we really want to prioritize strategic partnership funds as part of the Community and Economic Development Department. And you'll hear later from Rachel Taylor, who's been onboarded to manage this process with our economic development cohort, and Alex Mitchner being a part of that team as well. And so again, reaffirming the SBF purpose and that priority is really around addressing the opportunity gap. And so understanding that impact and how we want to have these funds to have impact on the opportunity gap is the main focus of these funds, and being very strategic about that. So that's our high level key takeaways today. And so right now I'll introduce you to Rachel Taylor, Economic Development Specialist in the CED department, and she will take it from here. Thanks, Rachel.
All right, thanks, Nikki. Jenna, next slide, please. Thanks. All right, so we've had a couple of changes since I believe we as a department last came and talked to you all about SPF. So I wanted to take a moment and introduce our core project team. So of course, Nikki Reed is our director. Alex Mitchner will be providing project support. And myself, Rachel Taylor, I'll be acting in a sort of project manager capacity. I also want to thank and highlight that we've got the support of other internal teams as well. We kicked off this conversation by talking with the Office of Equity and Inclusion. We're really excited that they are fully staffed now. And then we also talked with the Office of Data and Performance, the Finance Department, and the City Manager's Office. So really trying to start this process off with a solid foundation, and bringing in those different departments and offices is part of that. Next slide, please. So the other, being new to this, I wanted to ground myself in the history of these funds. And I thought since it had been some time, it'd be helpful to kind of look back over the evolution, so to speak, of these funds. Just to give a quick overview, basically in December of 2018 is when we really started focusing in for these funds on the opportunity gap. March of 2019 was when those funds were last awarded. And then between April 2019 and January of 2020, there was some discussion. There was a lot of evolution over these funds, and talk about direction and support for our nonprofit partners in this work. And then that brought us up to February of 2020. I'll go into the details in the next slide, but that was the last major HCD decision, really centering around the application parameters. for area nonprofits. And then after that period, it was meant to go to full council. And I think we all know March of 2020 was pretty hectic. And I don't believe it ever went to full council. So then that summer, the team engaged the equity department, community partners, and really focused on better understanding the needs in the community and engaging in this SPF redesign process. So then by November of 2020, that was the last formal decision, and that was to combine the fiscal years and maintain the focus on supporting the opportunity gap with, eliminating the opportunity gap with these funds. Excuse me. And so that brings us up to November of 2021, where we had just continued discussion around those fund administration points. So Jenna, next slide, please. And so I just want to highlight what was decided on in that last big decision. So the criteria approved for grant applications. So that put a cap on applicants' budgets of $1.5 million budgets or less. Also, staff recommended the applicants must demonstrate that they are focused on closing the opportunity gap with a focus on school-age children, and the applicants will provide demographics of those served. Staff will recommend to this committee and will include community development staff, equity and inclusion staff, and legal department staff in those recommendations. And the committee also decided on multi-year grants may be given for a maximum of 3 years, and that organizations receiving $10,000 or more must participate in capacity building, but all applicants are eligible to participate. And so that kind of gets us to that last major decision, but a lot has happened, between when we first started talking about the opportunity gap and really focusing those funds there in 2018 through this period, and then now today in 2020. So Jenna, next slide, please. That brings us to our next steps for this process. We're onboarding new staff into this SPF world. Also, we want to better understand what the context is out in the community. So we're really working on conducting an environmental scan, so to speak, of community resources. What are the needs? Are the focuses and strategies still the same as they were when the funds were last dispersed? So we want to better understand that context and how we can best align and support these funds with addressing the opportunity gap. Staff is also working on developing a program design, and we will return to the HCD committee with recommendations for this program. And I believe we'll return before the fall of 2022. I think the goal is to disperse the funds in the fall, but so that's our program timeline. And next slide, Jenna. And so that brings us back to our key takeaways. We've got these current federal grant cycles for CDBG, HOME, and ARPA funds. Those are currently underway, with HOME ARP really ramping up at this point. And in order to manage resources and staff capacity, the development of the SPF program will begin with us already having conducted work to continue to conduct that work, and then having the goal of allocating those funds for the fall of 2022. And community and economic development staff are focused on moving the Strategic Partnership Fund grant program forward. And we want to reaffirm that the SPF purpose and priority is really that these funds should remain on addressing the opportunity gap with a focus on school-aged children. And I believe that's our last slide. You can go to the next one, Jenna. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions. So.
Thank you, Rachel. Appreciate the presentation. Any questions from the committee?
I have a question about the capacity building requirement for applicants receiving more than $10,000. The reason why I have a question about that is because I remember, I think I was on HCD when that conversation came up. And I think since then, a lot of organizations who would be applicants, they're already participating in capacity building opportunities. So what if they can demonstrate that they're already in motion, like capacity building strategies are already in motion, they have plans and they've made certain benchmarks. Can they can that stand in the place of them participating in something that we facilitate?
And I'll just encourage Nikki and Alex to jump in. But I'd say at this point, this is the last formal recommendation that we've had. But I think that's part of what I'm curious about is to plug into and really support where these organizations are currently and where they want to go. And so I'm happy to work on that context and work with you all to come up with another option that might be better suited to our current situation.
And I'll follow up and just agree that, a lot has changed since February 2020. And while I think this provided a framework at the time, I think we need to understand what has changed and what we would propose as final criteria. So I think we want to acknowledge that this is the launching point and that opportunity gap is the focus. However, we as staff want to come back to the committee with more refined criteria that takes into consideration just the things that you point out, Vice Mayor. Exactly. It may be that is no longer a need and that the capacity is there. So I think we really want to use this as an information piece from a starting point, but also look at the context, do that environmental scan that Rachel was talking about to really see if this still is the frame that we want to pursue, or are there slight tweaks that we would want to introduce to create SBF 2022.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for staff? Okay. Well, we appreciate the update.
I have another comment. It's a burning question. I don't really know how to pose it. But I think when we give funding to individuals, to individual organizations, a lot of the dollars get absorbed in administrative cost. So the impact is really not felt in the community or that service community. In this instance, can we make sure we do some type of program efficiency to make sure that the dollars are really impacting the community, the students, the families, and not just being absorbed in salaries?
We have talked a lot, especially with our support teams too, and the phrase that we keep kind of reiterating is really prioritizing outcomes and impact. And so that's our main goal for these funds, really helping those children out and making sure that those dollars are really felt.
Yeah, it's a thing called the program efficiency ratio. And it kind of does a calculation of how much of a budget goes into administrative costs and how much goes directly into service or programs.
And that's great feedback. And I think that's part of our desire to connect so deeply with the Office of Data and Performance, is to really be clear about those outcomes and how we're assessing impact.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Any other questions about this topic before we move along? Okay. Thank you, staff, for preparing that update for us. For those of you listening at home, we're going to move on to our next agenda item. I do want to add that Councilwoman Mosley did request a moment to add another, take a moment to have a statement or share something. And we're going to do that right before public comment. So we'll add it to just after this next item. Okay. All right. So up next, we're on item number 4, Community Development Block Grant Funding. And we have a lot to discuss here: the timeline, the process, the format, and the goal being action next month. And I think Jonathan is going to move us through that.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to share an update on our CDBG and home funding process. As Nikki mentioned, the applications for both programs were due to community development staff back on February 4th. And so we received about 19 CDBG applications and 11 home applications. So our community development team is in the weeds, going through those applications with a fine-tooth comb, trying to determine eligibility and find those projects that are ready, willing, and able to serve the community and deliver HUD outcomes. The next steps in the process would be for staff to go through evaluations, collect any questions or concerns to share with our partner applicants, provide that feedback to them and give them a chance to respond or address or clarify any of those, and then provide that information back to the HCD committee and to the Home Consortium for review. In years past, that has then led to our late March funding meeting, where applicants were invited to give a 3-minute presentation, and then the two committees would then start working through the requests and determine funding allocations. What we're looking at this year is recommending from staff a shift in that process and to actually create two meetings. One would be earlier in March, looking at March 15th specifically, to have those presentations from applicants. So the applicant would have the opportunity to provide more information about their program beyond what's in the application. And staff would have time to hear those presentations and incorporate any of that feedback into staff evaluation, and then come back later in March for HCD. That would be the 24th of March would be the request to then have staff present funding recommendations based on the information provided, the presentations, and any feedback.
So how do y'all feel about that? A similar process to our ARPA? 19 applicants, do a presentation meeting, and then come back together for an allocation meeting? I learned a lot from our presentations with the ARPA, so I'm supportive of this idea. And I also think it's really just fair and a growth opportunity for the applicants to present and share their story and give their pitch and so on. I think it's kind of a win-win. Anybody else? Okay.
I agree.
So to be clear, okay, great. So, just to keep on time, we're going to have 2 meetings in March. So, Jonathan, did I hear right? The 24th is the one we want to pinpoint for decisions.
Yes.
So we need to today come up with that date beforehand for the presentations.
Correct.
What do we think? There's 19 and we're thinking a couple minutes each, so maybe an hour and a half meeting.
Right now, there is already a regular HCD meeting scheduled from 10 to 12 on March 15th. The Home Consortium met last week and penciled in the afternoon of the 15th to hear those home presentations. So it would mean a longer day of presentations specifically for you, Councilwoman Turner. But the idea would be to maybe separate those 2 events and give folks time to process. It's a lot of information to take in all in one sitting.
So does that work? So our presentation meeting would be our regularly scheduled meeting, and the extra meeting would be the 24th.
Correct.
Well, actually, what I wanted to discuss later would have been a request to include something in our March meeting.
Okay.
But
I think we still can, but if it's only presentations. Okay, well, maybe we can address that after we hear what you're going to say and figure out where to best locate. Okay. Are you all able to confirm the 24th?
Yes.
Okay. That is a lot easier than we thought it would be. So we have a plan. And a month from now, we'll be in the middle of it, and it'll be great. We're going to move right through it. Thank you, Jonathan, for the update and the process. And I think we have a situation. We're good. We have a plan. Okay. Well, that wraps up what we needed to do for item number 4. And Councilwoman Mosley, I know you have something you'd like to say. And then for those listening at home, we'll move to public comment, and that will be the end of our agenda. So Councilwoman Mosley, you have the floor.
okay, thank you, Chair Turner. What I wanted to discuss with each of you is the possibility of bringing forth a a nonprofit community partner to speak with us directly in our next in our next committee meeting. It's regarding A Hope and Homeward Bound. As each of you is aware, we pretty routinely get emails or calls from other neighbors regarding health and safety concerns they may have. And it has traditionally been our policy that law enforcement not get involved whenever practicable. Here lately, I have also been in communication with a church, an African American church that is located beside A Hope. It's a church that has been there as long as I can remember. And it's a church that has a history of also being very helpful to this particular community. What has now happened and what I have witnessed with my own eyes is behavior that is quite frankly, I've seen folks defile the building. So much so that the congregation, I believe, is seriously considering moving away from that location. This elicits a visceral response from me. Because traditionally the African American church has been a place of refuge, a place of safety. And quite frankly, in our city, there are so few of those. So for me, even the notion of the church having to consider this option is offensive. When the subject has been broached with Homeward Bound and A Hope regarding their ability to be good neighbors and help keep other neighbors safe, it's tradition. The initial response we received was, well, they're responsible for their own property. I will say they've kind of moved away from that a little bit, but it's a dire circumstance in my opinion. And the reason I want to discuss it with them in open, I need to know from them what their plan is going to be. And the reason I need to know that now is because I will take that in consideration when we are making decisions for, at this time, ARPA funding. Because what I see is if we continue to fund them, we are funding this bad behavior. It's as if the government is perpetrating this harm on the Black church. And I can't, in good conscience, be a part of that. So I would like to hear from them a plan, one that has a definitive start time, one that does not throw APD under the bus. And I'm hoping we can do that by the 15th, so I can move forward with making funding decisions.
Okay, thank you, Councilwoman Mosley. I know I too receive a lot of input and concern, really about greater downtown, also the area of Ann Street, but throughout downtown. A couple things I do understand. They've had a loss of executive director. They have an interim director that is there for this year. I understand they've lost a lot of staff like the rest of us. And I don't know to what extent that is impacting their ability to function as normal. I will say in the past, Homeward Bound has been an incredible partner with the city in supplying housing, supportive housing. And what you're speaking to is a particular component of their business. So in many ways, Homeward Bound is an incredible partner to the city, and we have a long history of working well together and successfully. I do want to add my voice to this concern. I would like to hear from them. I don't know that a public meeting is best or not, and then I imagine as chair, I will reach out to them and see if they're interested and available. And I hope we do hear from them. I issued a statement this week about downtown and how we need to come together as we come out of this pandemic. And I think this is part of the conversation because we need to be better neighbors. All neighbors need to be better neighbors. And downtown, I consider it everyone's neighborhood. It's the one neighborhood that belongs to everyone. It's important that we are taking care of and watching out for each other in all respects. So I think this conversation needs to be had. I appreciate you bringing it up and doing so in a public realm. Any other comments, or Vice Mayor, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, so to be specific about, each one of us probably has an idea of what information we're expecting, but I would like to understand from them if they believe that this service model is appropriate for that section of town. My understanding is that there is a low barrier, high access element to their service model right now. And, with a couple of tweaks to their model, maybe I can support them remaining in that area, but I think they need an operational safety plan or something that can demonstrate that they can manage their own operation and then they can in turn be a good neighbor. Because right now I think things are a little bit out of control. And I don't believe that it's only impacting neighbors. I think it's impacting their staff as well and the clients that they serve. So, yeah, I think we need to probably review the service that they're delivering and see if we can help them, make the adjustments that they need so that they can be good neighbors. And if not, then maybe we have other considerations to make.
I agree. I did take the time to reach out to the executive director and meet with them last week, and I believe they're listening now. And I think they recognize that the situation is concerning. I understand they're looking at increased security and other options, and may be working on this plan already. So I look forward to hearing from them about that. I do know too, as council moves forward on exploring the idea of a low barrier, high access shelter, where and how is going to be crucial to those conversations. And I wonder if these kind of resources need to be near each other, or if this particular location may not be the best end location. And maybe it's near this, some like version you're saying, Shanika. So we have a lot to learn. I appreciate the topic being brought up. And yeah, if you have anything else to share, otherwise we'll continue to move on.
I think anything can work with the proper management. And sometimes your management is a little different than what you deliver in your mission. Your management sometimes has to live certain standards in order to keep folks safe. I'm interested in having a conversation. I have some ideas.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you for this topic, women. All right, fellow councilwomen, I believe we are on to the next item, and that would be public comment. Staff, do we have any public comment or anyone in the queue?
There's no one in the queue.
Okay, well, then we are adjourned. Thank you for your time today, and I will be in touch about the next agenda and if we can get that item added. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.